Unbelievable. I can't believe I let it go on this long. I stared at my phone, disbelief creeping through me. My name is Jordan Wright, and for years I thought I was just being a good daughter, but what I'm about to tell you, it's not just betrayal. It's the truth they never wanted you to know. And it changes everything. It's a life that I worked hard for. From the outside, everything seems perfect: successful career, a beautiful townhouse in Burlington, and a family I've always felt close to, even if we didn't always agree on everything. But that's life, isn't it? A constant balancing act. Or at least, that's how it felt to me until yesterday. I had always been the dependable one, the one everyone could count on. I had built my marketing consulting business from the ground up after college, with no safety net, no financial help from anyone. It was my work ethic and my ambition that got me where I am today. I wasn't born into wealth, and I had learned early on that the only way to get ahead was to put in the hours, do the work, and sacrifice along the way. When my parents retired a few years ago, things weren't easy for them. They struggled with their finances as they always had. It was never about luxury, and I understood that. They had lived modest lives, working jobs that didn't pay much but kept us going. But when they reached retirement age, the struggle seemed even harder for them. So I did what I thought was the right thing. I stepped in. Every month, I transferred money into their joint account. $3,000, without fail. It wasn't a lot to me, not compared to the effort I put into my business. I told myself it was for their peace of mind, for their happiness in retirement. They needed it, right? I had the means to help, and I didn't mind. After all, they had raised me. This was just a small way I could give back. There was a sense of satisfaction in it. Every time I sent the money, I imagined them enjoying their time, taking vacations they had never taken, buying things they wanted, things that weren't always affordable before. I pictured them comfortable in their retirement years, no longer worrying about bills. It made me feel good to know I could be that person for them. But there was always a nagging feeling, a question in the back of my mind. Was this enough? Was I doing enough? There were months when they'd call and say, "We really need this extra help, Jordan. Your dad's been having issues with his medication and your mom's furnace is on the blink." So, I'd send extra. Always a little more than what they asked for, just to make sure they had everything they needed. Sometimes I'd get a text from my brother Kevin. He was the more carefree one, never quite as serious as me. I had always chalked that up to our differences. I was the responsible one, the one who kept the family together, at least financially. Kevin didn't seem to understand how tight things were for them, but I didn't mind. I was glad I could be the one to help. It wasn't just money I was sending. I made sure they had the best health insurance I could afford, and I took them to appointments when I could, ensuring they had everything they needed for their medical care. I wasn't just financially supporting them, I was emotionally invested, and I thought that was the right thing to do. They were my parents, after all. But something happened yesterday. Something that changed everything. I was sitting in my office, the rain pouring outside as it often did in Burlington in April. I was staring out of the window, lost in my thoughts. My phone buzzed, and I checked it absently. It was a message from Kevin, one of those texts he sent that seemed so insignificant. But this time it was different. It wasn't a regular text. No, this time it was a message meant for a smaller group chat. A secret one. The family one. The message was simple. "Just sent Jordan the $3,000. She's too stupid to realize we're using her." And then there were other messages I wasn't meant to see. The ones from my father and mother. They were laughing at me, at my generosity. "Keep that gravy train running," my dad had written. "She'll never stop sending it." I felt my breath catch in my throat, and I clicked through to the next message, my fingers trembling. My mother had written, "She's such a sucker for helping family. I almost feel bad. Almost." Each text, each screenshot, felt like a punch to my stomach. My heart was racing, and I couldn't breathe. I kept scrolling, seeing year after year of conversations about how to manipulate me, how to play on my sympathies. How they had been planning expensive vacations while telling me they couldn't afford their medications. How they had been upgrading their cars while making me believe they were barely scraping by. It wasn't just about money, it was about how they had used me for years, without even an ounce of gratitude, and worse, how they had laughed at me for being so blind. The realization hit me like a wave, and I stumbled back in my chair. My mind raced, thoughts colliding in a blur of confusion and anger. How could they do this to me? I stared at my phone, the messages still staring back at me. How had I been so blind? How had I let this happen? I felt a burst of rage surge through me. The betrayal, the manipulation. They had been using me for years. The people I loved most, the people I had sacrificed so much for, had turned me into nothing more than a tool to support their lifestyle. I couldn't just let this slide. I needed answers. I needed to know why they had done this to me. And most of all, I needed to confront them. But I wasn't sure I was ready. Could I even look them in the eye after everything I had seen? I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking, and made my way to the door. There was a knock. It was Kevin. I opened the door, still clutching my phone, and there he stood, soaking wet from the rain, his face pleading. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but instead I just asked, "What do you want, Kevin?" He looked miserable, standing there, trying to explain, but nothing he said could undo the damage. For the first time I realized I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. And I didn't know how to feel about that yet. Kevin stood there in the rain, his eyes pleading with me, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. The truth was already in my hands, written in black and white on my phone screen. There was no going back, no pretending everything was okay. I could still hear my father's voice in my head mocking me, telling me to keep the gravy train running. I could still feel the sting of those words, how they had chipped away at the trust I had so blindly given. "Jordan, please." Kevin's voice cracked as he took a step forward, but I held my hand up, stopping him in his tracks. "No, Kevin, you don't get to please me, not after what I saw." My voice was steadier than I expected, but the cold fury in my chest was starting to burn hotter. Kevin lowered his gaze. His usual easygoing demeanor was gone. He looked smaller, defeated, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But I couldn't let myself feel pity. Not anymore. Not for any of them. I didn't know what to say. I just went along with it, he muttered, his words stumbling over each other. I didn't want to make things worse. Mom and Dad, they kept saying you wouldn't mind, that you'd want to help. My eyes narrowed. Help? Is that what you're calling it? Using me, Kevin? You've been using me, all of you, for years. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I glanced at the phone still clutched in my hand. The screen was frozen on one of Kevin's messages, the one where he called me a sucker. It wasn't even the worst of it, but it was the one that hit the hardest. He had never once considered what it meant to me, what it cost me. Not once had he stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the ATM he thought I was. "Please, Jordan, you don't understand," Kevin started, but I cut him off. "I don't understand? Really? After everything I've done for them? I've sacrificed my own life for theirs, Kevin. I've worked myself into the ground, and you think I don't understand?" My voice was rising, the words tumbling out of me like they had been waiting to escape for years. Kevin looked down at the ground, unable to meet my gaze. I know, I messed up. But you have to believe me, they're scared. They've gotten so used to this, to living like this. They can't go back to their old life. Not now. I wanted to yell at him, to tell him he was wrong, but instead, I just laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Scared? They're scared? Kevin, they've been living like kings while I've been working 2 jobs, missing vacations, skipping meals, and living in a townhouse I can barely afford. And they're scared? I shook my head, unable to believe the audacity of it all. You've all been living off me, pretending to be struggling while you buy golf clubs, take cruises, and live a life I can't even imagine for myself. The rain outside grew heavier, and I could feel the tension between us growing thicker. Kevin didn't say anything. He just stood there like he didn't know how to fix it, like he didn't know how to undo the years of manipulation that had been drilled into him. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. "I can't do this anymore, Kevin," I finally said, my voice cold and final. "I'm done. You can go back to them, but I'm done." Kevin's face crumpled. "Please, don't say that. I don't want to lose you, Jordan. You're my sister. I'm sorry. I'll talk to them. I'll fix it." I almost believed him. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. The damage had already been done. I stepped back, opening the door wide enough to signal he should leave. He hesitated, still looking at me with those wide, pleading eyes. "What are you going to do?" I swallowed hard. The weight of the decision pressed on me like a boulder. But I knew the answer. "I'm going to make things right for me, Kevin. For the first time in a long time, I'm going to do something for myself." And with that, I closed the door, leaving Kevin standing on the porch, drenched and broken, while I shut out the family I had spent my life supporting. The moment the door clicked shut, I sank to the floor, my back against the wood. My hands were shaking and my mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Could I really do this? Could I really walk away from them, from everything I had believed was love? But deep down I knew. I had been living a lie, and the truth had just shattered it all. I opened my phone again, and the messages were still there. The conversations between my parents and Kevin. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through them again. How had I been so blind? How had I allowed this to happen? I felt sick to my stomach, the anger twisting in my gut. And then there was a sharp knock at the door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Kevin? Again. I hesitated, but only for a moment. I wasn't going to let him in this time. I wasn't going to let any of them back into my life. I checked my phone again. The text from my mother blinked up at me, and my stomach turned. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. We need to talk, Jordan. Now." The manipulation hadn't stopped. They were still trying to guilt me. I grabbed my jacket and marched to the door. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. Not now, not ever. But there was something else inside me, something I hadn't expected. A quiet sense of relief. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't just doing things for them, I was doing something for me. I opened the door again, but this time, I didn't let them in. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I didn't want to hear their lies. I had seen the truth, and it was undeniable. "Leave," I said quietly, my voice firm. "Now." Kevin hesitated, glancing back at my parents before he stepped away. And for a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, something like regret. But it was too late for. They had made their choices. I watched them walk away, and I knew that my life was never going to be the same. The truth had been exposed, and I was no longer the person they had made me out to be. As I closed the door behind me, I finally allowed myself to breathe, letting out a sigh of relief. I had taken the first step toward freedom, and nothing would ever make me go back. The house was quiet after they left, too quiet. I could still hear the echo of my mother's text ringing in my ears. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof." As if I was supposed to crumble at the sound of that, as if they hadn't spent years lying straight to my face. I sat on the couch, staring at the darkened window, the April rain blurring everything outside like a painting left out in a storm. Inside me, everything was louder than ever. My thoughts were spiraling, not just confusion anymore, not even disbelief. This was something deeper, something raw. A sharp, unrelenting heat under my skin. Was any of it real? The birthdays they said they were proud of me, the hugs when I visited, the thank yous I thought were genuine, the tears when I helped them pay off their credit card debt. Had they been laughing even then? My hand tightened around my phone as I pulled up the screenshots again, because of course I had saved them. It was a habit now. A terrible, painful one. I needed to keep looking, as if seeing the messages again might make it make sense. "Kevin, just told Jordan Dad needs dental surgery." Ka-ching. "Delameo, this girl's too stupid to realize we're using her. Just bought those golf clubs your father wanted. Jordan would flip if she knew." I blinked hard, but the screen didn't blur. I had spent years cutting corners in my own life so they could have everything I thought they needed. No vacations, second-hand furniture, skipped luxuries. I hadn't bought the new car I'd dreamed about because they told me they couldn't afford heating. I once stayed home on my birthday just so I could send them money for an emergency roof leak. Turns out that roof never leaked. And they laughed about it, like it was a joke, like I was the joke. Stupid, successful daughter. I felt the heat rise in my throat, my jaw tightening so hard it ached. My hands shook as I stood and walked to my home office, the one room that had always felt like mine. A space of control, of focus. Now, it felt tainted, Like nothing in this house, nothing in my life belonged fully to me anymore. But I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. Instead, I sat down at my desk, pulled open my laptop, and logged into my bank account. There they were. 5 years of $3,000 monthly transfers. Every month without fail. A digital breadcrumb trail of my loyalty. My belief in them. 60 months. That was $180,000, and that didn't even include the emergencies. I clicked through my transaction history. Another $5,000 for the furnace. $3,200 for supposed dental surgery. $1,800 for car repairs. On and on. I opened a spreadsheet and began typing. Family financial support. 2018 to 2023. It was clinical at first, just dates and amounts. But as I listed each transaction, I started adding notes. Dad's heart meds, now I know they're fake. Mom's furnace broke, they bought a new flat screen that week. Kevin's student loan panic, right before he flew to Vegas. I couldn't stop. The betrayal was pouring out through my fingers, furious and fast. And yet, through the anger, something else tugged at me. Something colder. Sadder. Had they ever loved me? Or was I just their golden goose from the moment I succeeded? Did they smile at me only because they saw dollar signs? Was the "we're so proud of you" ever real? Or just bait? And then a sharper question hit me like a punch to the ribs. Did they even know me at all? Because I knew them. Or I thought I did. I thought I was part of a family built on love, on sacrifice, on sticking together through hard times. Instead, I'd been financing their vacations while skipping my own. I'd been the only one sacrificing. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Kevin. "Please don't do this. Dad says his prescription got denied at the pharmacy. What did you do?" I stared at it for a moment before locking the screen. I didn't respond. I was tired of reacting, tired of bending, tired of caring while they didn't. I took a deep breath and reached for my planner. I flipped to a blank page and wrote a new heading. Unravel the damage. I made 3 columns. What I gave, money, policies, accounts. What they lied about, every manipulation, every false emergency. What I need to undo, everything that tied me to them financially. It was longer than I expected. I'd given more than money. I'd given peace of mind, access to my insurance. I'd made them beneficiaries on my life insurance policy. I'd trusted them with things people don't hand out lightly, and they'd used every single one. As I finished the list, something shifted inside me. I wasn't confused anymore. I was done. Done being the good daughter, done being the reliable one, done letting their guilt and fear dictate my generosity. I had spent 5 years thinking I was helping them survive, when in reality they were thriving off my blind loyalty. No more. I looked at the clock. Midnight. Tomorrow, I would begin undoing every thread they had tied to me. And this time, I wouldn't ask for permission. Because they didn't just break my heart. They taught me how to protect it. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The weight in my chest had lifted, replaced by something more resolute. It was as if in the span of a single night, I had shed a skin I hadn't realized was suffocating me. I stood in front of the mirror staring at my reflection for a long moment. There were no tears, no sorrow, just emptiness. A calm that didn't come from weakness but strength. The strength to move forward, to sever the ties that had kept me bound for so long. I had always been the one who provided. Always. It was my role in the family, the successful daughter who could fix everything. I'd been proud of that role, at least until now. Now it felt like a cage. Now, I could see the bars. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling just slightly. The contacts list flickered across the screen, and I hovered over my parents' names. They were still there, just a tap away. So close. But also, so far. I took a deep breath, and without hesitation, I clicked on the number for Vermont Community Bank. I needed to close the supplemental retirement account I had set up for them. The account that had been my secret plan, my last gesture of love, the surprise for them when they turned 70. I had been putting $1,000 a month into it for 3 years, over $42,000. That was money I had earned, money that I had worked for. Not them. A woman named Samuel picked up the phone. Vermont Community Bank, this is Samuel. How can I assist you today? I need to close an investment account, I said, my voice steady, controlled. I sounded like a businesswoman, not the daughter who had spent years giving her heart and soul and money away. Certainly, Miss Wright, I can assist with that. May I ask why you wish to close the account? I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I wasn't going to explain myself. Not to him, not to anyone. I simply no longer wish for the recipients to have access to the account, I said flatly. Please proceed. Understood, Samuel replied smoothly. I just need to verify your identity. Please hold on for a moment. As I waited for him to complete the verification process, I felt a strange calm wash over me. My fingers tapped lightly on the desk. Each tap was like a small, silent countdown, signaling the end of an era. The last financial tie I had to my parents was being severed. Finally, Samuel came back on the line. Thank you for your patience. As the sole controller of the account, you have the right to close it at any time. The balance of $42,680 will be returned to your primary account within 3 business days. My hand hovered over the phone, and I realized for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of this decision. I wasn't nervous or second-guessing myself. I was done. Yes, please proceed, I said, my voice even. And I would also like to cancel all recurring transfers to the joint account belonging to Robert and Patricia Wright, effective immediately. There was a slight pause. Certainly, Miss Wright. I'll process that now. You'll receive confirmation shortly. The transaction was done. I hung up the phone and let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. It was done. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sorry. I felt free. The next step came quickly. I had already made a list, what I need to undo. It felt like a to-do list of things that should have been checked off years ago. The next call was to my health insurance provider, the one I had been so sure would protect them, the one I had added them to as dependents 2 years ago. When I explained the situation, the representative Miguel was incredibly kind. I understand, he said after hearing the details. We can process this as a change in dependent status. Since you no longer provide more than 50% of their financial support, they will no longer be eligible under your plan. I wanted to feel a twinge of guilt, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt the satisfaction of doing what was right for me, for my future. After hanging up with Miguel, I went online to update my life insurance policy. I had been paying for their premiums for their beneficiaries all these years. Now I changed it. I removed them as beneficiaries and designated a local children's charity instead. One by one, I severed the financial ties that had connected me to them. The bank accounts, the insurance, the retirement fund, all of it, gone. And yet, there was still one more thing left. Kevin. I had been paying for his student loan for 3 years, every month, $580. I wasn't sure if I could just walk away from this one. I had always believed he needed help. He was my brother, after all. But had he been manipulated too? Had he just gone along with everything like he said? Or had he known exactly what he was doing? I had been paying for him, believing that I was helping him get back on his feet. But now I wasn't so sure. The thing that made me hesitate was the last text I received from him. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Please, you have to help them. They can't afford their mortgage payment without you. I read the message again, carefully. No apology, no understanding of how much I had sacrificed. Just the pressure to keep giving. I knew what I had to do. I had done enough. I would not give in. The thought of helping them, of continuing to bail them out, no longer seemed like the right thing. It had never been the right thing. I was the one who had been blind. I wasn't going to be their source of support any longer. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by empty files and open accounts that I was closing, I finally allowed myself to exhale. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of those ties being cut. For the first time in years, I could breathe, and yet part of me still wondered, what would they do next? Would they come after me? Would they call again, beg me to come back? But I couldn't worry about that. Not now. I had taken back control. That was all that mattered. The days after I closed all those accounts, severed all the financial ties, felt surreal. I spent the first few days in a kind of strange numbness, as if I was floating in a world that had shifted just slightly off its axis. My townhouse felt quieter, emptier, as though the absence of their presence, financial and emotional, had left an echo behind, one I wasn't sure how to fill. But there was also a sense of peace. A strange, unfamiliar kind of peace. I no longer had the constant gnawing worry about whether I was doing enough, whether I was giving enough, whether my parents were okay, because I knew now that they hadn't been the ones in need. I had been. I thought I'd feel the guilt, the regret, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes after a storm has passed, leaving a sky that is finally clear, even if the world around me had been changed forever. But that wasn't the end. I knew it wasn't. The calls started coming in after just a few days. First, it was Kevin. A new number this time, one I hadn't blocked. I ignored it. Then, my mother. The same number that had sent the message about my father's blood pressure. I didn't respond. Finally, my father. His voicemail was sharp, demanding, filled with that familiar sense of entitlement I had grown so used to. Jordan, this has gone too far. You need to stop this childish behavior immediately. I don't care what you think. You're our daughter, and you don't just walk away from family. Each call, each voicemail only reinforced what I already knew. They had no idea what they had done. They were still trying to manipulate me, still trying to guilt me into giving them what they wanted. And yet, with each new message, with each new attempt to reach out, I felt my resolve strengthen. By the end of the week, I received a certified letter. I didn't even have to open it to know it was from them. The envelope had that unmistakable feel of an appeal, a final attempt to get me to fold. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and began reading my mother's words that made my stomach churn even before I finished them. Jordan, we don't understand why you're punishing us like this. Yes, we made some jokes in poor taste, but that's what families do. Your father's heart medication is $450 a month without insurance. Our mortgage is due next week, and we can't cover it without your help. Without you, we might lose our condo. Is that what you want? For your elderly parents to be homeless? Please stop this cruelty and talk to us. I felt my fingers trembling as I set the letter down. They were still using the same tactics, the same manipulation, but this time it wasn't working. It wasn't going to work. It was a lie. The medication wasn't $450. I knew that now. I had done the research, called the pharmacy myself. It was $42. It was a lie, and so was the story about their mortgage. I remembered the conversation from a few months ago, where they had boasted about their lakeside condo and the new furniture they had bought. They weren't struggling. They had been living a lie. And the most infuriating part? They still thought they could manipulate me. I set the letter aside, my chest tight with a mixture of anger and disgust. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. It had always been about control. They had taken everything I had given them without a second thought, and now, when it all came crashing down, they wanted me to come running back to save them from the consequences of their own actions. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that they had lied to me for years, or that they had no real understanding of what they had done to me, no understanding of the pain I had carried for them. The days passed in silence after that. I didn't respond to the letter, I didn't respond to the texts. I blocked them all. And then one evening, as I sat at my desk, the doorbell rang. I froze. For a moment, I wondered if I could just ignore it. But I couldn't. Not now. I stood, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest, but this time, there was no hesitation. I knew what I had to do. I opened the door to find my parents standing on the porch. My father looked different. Smaller, somehow. There was no bravado in his posture, no anger in his eyes. Instead, there was something that almost looked like regret. My mother, too, looked worn. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes plain, and she seemed smaller than I remembered. It took everything in me not to feel a pang of guilt, but I didn't. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about them and what they had done. Jordan, my father said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. We need to talk. I didn't move. We're not talking, I replied, my voice calm but firm. You don't get to do this anymore. You don't get to use me or guilt me or manipulate me into taking care of you. That's not my responsibility. My father's face tightened, the old anger flaring up, but my mother stepped forward, her hands wringing together. Please, Jordan, we've learned our lesson. We've lost everything. The condo, the car, we didn't mean to hurt you. She faltered. We're sorry. We've made mistakes. I held up my hand to stop her. No? You haven't learned anything. You're sorry you got caught. You're not sorry for what you did. You haven't apologized for using me, for laughing behind my back, for making me feel like I was worthless unless I was giving you something. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my voice, louder now. You haven't even acknowledged how much you hurt me. All of these years. Do you think this apology is enough? Do you think that telling me you're sorry for losing things you didn't even need will make me forget everything you've done? The words came faster now, faster than I had intended. I'm done with this. I'm done trying to fix things for you. You need to figure it out on your own, because I am not your ATM anymore. I never was. There was silence. For a long moment they didn't say anything, their faces showing only confusion and a faint trace of shame. I didn't wait for them to respond. I didn't need to hear it anymore. I turned and walked back inside, my heart pounding in my chest, but this time there was no wait, no regret. I closed the door softly behind me and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. The days that followed felt like the aftermath of a storm, calm but still unsettled. My phone was silent, there were no more calls from my parents, no more pleading messages from Kevin, no sudden visits at my doorstep. It was like they had all just disappeared. I didn't feel relief right away, at least not the kind I thought I would. Instead, there was this emptiness. Not loneliness, but a space where I had once lived my life under the weight of their demands. I wasn't used to being so unencumbered. I hadn't realized how deeply their presence, especially their financial dependence on me, had woven itself into my daily life until it was gone. Every time I checked my phone, I half expected to see a message from Kevin, from my mom, from my dad. Even a generic email from them pretending everything was fine. But nothing came. The silence was deafening, but it was also strangely beautiful. I spent the next few days in a kind of haze. At first, I tried to work, but even the clients I was meeting felt distant. It was as though I was still untangling the knots in my mind, trying to come to terms with everything I had discovered about my family and about myself. I could focus, but it wasn't the same. I felt different, like a person who had stepped out of an old skin and wasn't quite sure where she fit now. I had spent so long wearing the identity of the successful daughter, the one who made it, the one who always helped, the one who carried the financial burden for the family, that I didn't know who I was without it. What had I really done for myself over the past 5 years? Where had I focused my energy? On them, on fixing their lives, on giving them the world that I thought they deserved. And in the process, I had lost sight of the world I was building for myself. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, the soft hum of the city outside my window providing a subtle background to the thoughts swirling in my head. My fingers tapped absently on the table as I stared out the window, reflecting. What now? The question wasn't as urgent as it had once been, but it still lingered. Without the constant pressure from my family, without the weight of their expectations, who was I really? I realized that for the first time in years, I was starting to think about the future. Not theirs but my own. Not the sacrifices I had made for them, but the opportunities I had missed for myself, the vacations I had put off, the house I had delayed buying, the relationships I had let slip through my fingers because I had always been too busy. I hadn't done it consciously. It wasn't as if I had decided to put my life on hold. But I had. I had been so wrapped up in being the daughter who did everything right that I hadn't made the time to just live. My phone buzzed. I picked it up without thinking. Another message from Kevin. The last time we spoke, I had blocked his number, but somehow his message came through. It was short. It was simple. Mom and Dad are really struggling. I don't know how much longer they can keep it together. They still need you. My stomach twisted, but I didn't immediately respond. Instead, I read the message again, letting the words settle in my mind. They still need you. How many times had I heard that before? How many times had I told myself that it was true? I exhaled slowly, setting the phone down on the table. They didn't need me. Not in the way Kevin or they wanted me to believe. They needed to face their own consequences. And more importantly, I needed to face mine. I could have responded. I could have sent money, given them a lifeline, played the role they had always expected of me. But I knew what that would lead to. It would lead to more manipulation, more empty promises, and more of the same cycle. Instead, I reached for my laptop. It was time to think about my future again. My real future, not the one I had built around them. I began reviewing the business projections for my marketing consultancy, and for the first time in months, I felt excitement spark in my chest. There were things I wanted to do, things I had put off, new projects, new ideas, things that didn't involve family drama. I had made my decision, and I wasn't turning back. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from Megan, my attorney and best friend, the one person who had supported me through this entire ordeal. "I know this is hard, but you made the right call. Don't second-guess yourself. You're free, Jordan. Don't let them pull you back in." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that I had already done the hard part. I had severed the ties. I had stood up for myself. I had broken free from the role I had played for so long. But there was still that nagging question. Was it the right thing to do? The answer came to me quietly, like a whisper in the stillness of the afternoon. Yes, they didn't get to keep me as a puppet. I was allowed to live my own life, to make my own decisions, and to not feel guilty for it. I turned off my phone, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to just be. To breathe without the pressure, without the weight of my family's expectations hanging over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer afraid. I had stepped into a new chapter, one that was all mine. And that was the first time in years that I could say that with certainty. The silence was no longer deafening. It was peaceful, and I was ready for whatever came next. A few weeks passed, and life, though still different, had begun to take on a new rhythm. My work was picking up pace again, and I had even managed to schedule a short trip out of town, something I had not done in years. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that I had abandoned in the wake of my family's constant demands. I had grown accustomed to the solitude in my townhouse, to the space I now had to think clearly without constant interruptions. It felt good to simply be. But, as I learned in the months ahead, healing is never linear. There would be days where the silence felt too heavy, too empty. Days when I could almost feel the weight of the past pressing down on me, reminding me of the family I had tried so hard to help. It was in those moments of quiet, when the world around me seemed to slow down, that the questions crept back into my mind. Was I being too harsh? Was I wrong to cut them off completely? Couldn't I have found some middle ground? I shook the thoughts away as best as I could. I had made my choice. They had manipulated me for years, and I had paid a heavy price for believing in them. No amount of guilt would change that. But then one evening, as I was sitting at my desk, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Kevin. It wasn't a message from my parents either. It was something I hadn't expected. An email from my uncle Pete, my father's brother. The subject line caught my attention. "A message from your father's side of the family." I paused for a moment before opening it. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I certainly didn't anticipate the weight of what I read. "Jordan, I'm not sure what's been going on with your parents, but I've been getting calls from them asking if they can move in with me. They say you've cut them off financially, and they're about to lose everything. I wanted to hear your side of the story before making any decisions, so I'm reaching out to you. I hope everything is all right. Whatever the situation is, I'm happy to talk it through. Let me know when you can." Pete. I sat there for a long time after reading it, the weight of his words sinking in slowly. Pete was one of the few family members who had always been distant from my parents. He had a sharp memory of how they had treated him years ago, and I knew he had distanced himself from them as much as he could, but even Pete, despite everything, was offering to listen. I felt a momentary wave of frustration. Here it was again. Someone else on the outside trying to make sense of what had happened between my parents and me. Someone else trying to fix what they saw as a problem. Why couldn't they just leave me alone? Why did they think they had the right to insert themselves into this mess? At the same time, a small nagging part of me wondered, should I have told him everything? Should I have explained my side to him? I stared at the email for a while longer, the cursor blinking at the bottom of the screen, waiting for me to respond. But I wasn't ready to respond. Not yet. Instead, I shut the laptop with a soft click and walked away from the desk, pacing through the house. The thing was, I wasn't just angry at my parents anymore. I was angry at the whole system I had allowed myself to be part of. I was angry at the guilt they had piled on me, at the way they had manipulated me without even realizing how damaging it was. I was angry that people I loved, people I had trusted, could treat me like I was nothing more than an ATM with a heart. I reached the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water and taking a deep breath. The house felt still. So still, in fact, that it almost felt like it was holding its breath along with me. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down to see another message. This time from Kevin. I had blocked his number months ago. But there he was, trying once again. My thumb hovered over the screen before I opened it. Jordan, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to understand something. Mom and Dad, they're falling apart. They can't handle it without you. They keep saying they're sorry, but they don't know how to fix things. Please just hear them out. They need you more than ever. I didn't know what to do with that. The familiar tug of guilt rose in my chest again. There it was. They need you. He hadn't changed. None of them had. I stood there, staring at the message, and for a moment I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head, the way she had always told me, family is all you have in the end. The words echoed, and I felt a wave of uncertainty flood over me. But then I remembered the reality. The truth, the screenshots, the years of manipulation, the constant unspoken expectation that I would be the one to carry the weight for everyone else. The anger that had built up inside me, the feeling of being used. And suddenly, I remembered what I had done to free myself from all of that. I remembered the strength it had taken to cut ties. I couldn't undo it. I couldn't go back. With a deep breath, I typed back a simple response to Kevin. I can't help them anymore. I've done all I can. I didn't expect a reply. In fact, I hoped there wouldn't be one. The silence that followed was what I needed. The silence was my boundary. I set my phone down on the counter, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if they would eventually reach out again or if this chapter was truly over. But I knew this. I had made the decision for myself, and that was something I would never apologize for. In the end, there was only one truth I could trust. I was enough, just as I was, without them. And with that, I closed the door on the past once more. The weeks stretched into months, and I began to realize something profound. My life was moving forward. It wasn't the way I'd planned it, certainly not the way I'd imagined when I was younger, but it was mine now. I wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations, nor was I bound by the role I had spent so long playing. I was Jordan Wright. Not just a daughter, a provider, or an ATM. I was me, and for the first time in a long time, I was starting to understand who that was. Every day felt like a new beginning. My business flourished as I focused on projects I had put on the back burner for so long. I took on new clients, expanded my team, and even began considering hiring an assistant to help with the growing workload. The old me, the one who used to put everyone else first, was being replaced by a woman who could look at her work and be proud of it, without feeling guilty about taking time for herself. I spent evenings exploring hobbies I had neglected, like cooking and reading, and even started exercising again. I had given up so many of these things for years, thinking I didn't have the time or energy. But now I was realizing that there was time for everything that mattered to me. And what mattered to me was reclaiming the parts of my life that I had lost. As for the family, the silence continued. My phone no longer buzzed with messages from Kevin, and the letters from my parents stopped coming after that final one. I didn't hear from Uncle Pete again either, and that was fine. I didn't need any more apologies or explanations from them. I had heard enough. I had made my peace with the situation. I had told myself I was done, and I truly was. I didn't regret cutting them out of my life. They had been manipulative and toxic. The hardest part, however, was not just severing the financial ties, but accepting that they didn't want me for who I was. They wanted me for what I could give. And that was never going to change. It was in those quiet moments, when I found myself alone with my thoughts, that the full impact of everything began to sink in. For years, I had been a woman who only knew how to give. I had forgotten what it meant to ask for help, to accept kindness without feeling obligated to return it. I had forgotten what it meant to have a relationship that wasn't transactional. But now, as I looked back on everything, I began to recognize that true love didn't come with strings attached. True love was not built on expectations, and I had been seeking that kind of love all along without even knowing it. One morning as I sipped my coffee, I found myself smiling for no reason at all. A deep, contented smile that came from knowing I was finally free. Free from the manipulation, free from the guilt, free from the expectations. It wasn't just about cutting them off, it was about choosing myself. That afternoon, while I was reviewing a client proposal, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and I immediately hesitated before answering. The first few seconds were filled with static and a brief silence, and then I heard a voice. It was Kevin. "Jordan?" he said, his voice small and hesitant. I took a deep breath, surprised to hear from him after all this time. It had been months since the last contact, and the familiar pang of frustration began to bubble up in me. But I had made a decision that day, months ago, when I closed all those accounts and walked away from the family who had used me. I wasn't going to allow this to undo everything I had worked for. "Kevin," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What do you want?" I don't know what to say," Kevin said, his voice faltering. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I've been trying to fix things, but I don't know how." I let his words sink in, but there was no rush to respond. I had heard the apology before, but I had learned that words without actions meant nothing. "I appreciate you calling, Kevin," I said softly but with certainty. "But I've already made my decision. I'm not going to go back. I can't. You and Mom and Dad, you all need to take responsibility for the way things went. I've done all I can, and I can't be the one to fix it anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing my words, the weight of them. "I understand," Kevin finally said, and I could tell he meant it. "I don't expect you to fix anything. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'll take responsibility for my part." His words were simple, but they were enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt a shift that wasn't just in him, but in me. It wasn't about forgiving him or my parents. It was about knowing I had made the right decision for myself. "I'm glad you called, Kevin," I said, my voice softer now. "But I need to be clear. I'm moving on, and I hope you will too." "I will. I promise," he replied, and there was no anger, no desperation in his voice anymore. There was just acceptance. I ended the call, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly at peace. The next few days passed by quietly. I didn't hear from Kevin again, and my parents remained silent. The house felt full again, but this time it was filled with my life, my choices. I had reclaimed the space they had once occupied, not just in my home, but in my heart. I didn't need to hear from them anymore. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to love me the way I wanted them to. What mattered was that I loved myself, and that I had the power to choose my own path. And that was enough. As I sat in my favorite armchair one evening looking out the window at the city skyline, I realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in years, I was doing it on my own terms, and that felt like freedom.